All right, welcome back everyone to the second installment of the UN podcast vlog. We're not quite sure what we're creating yet, but it's some video content and we're bringing you some fresh concepts and ideas. We're here to talk about specifically the upcoming Stages of Life seminar that's being put on by UN Consulting. We have the co-founder, Gabe Sakakeeny, who's here with us as our guest. Heejin and I are going to be your hosts for today. I have a background in agile coaching, as well as video game development and a variety of other fields in the professional sector, in the tech sector, and various other sectors. And Heejin, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, and I have a background in user experience as well as health coaching and spiritual coaching, and I'm also part of Consulting.
That's fantastic. So we're here to talk to you a little bit about quite an interesting model. Before that, I want to just introduce our guest, Gabe, co-founder of UN Consulting. He has been everything from an orchestra conductor, an award-winning, internationally recognized author, a consultant for business, and a variety of things in between, Gabe. So I'm really interested to hear what you and your business partner, Scott Forgy, have created and what you have to share with us about this new model of the stages of life. So really welcome and thank you for being here with us to talk to us.
Thanks, Nico. It's great to be here. Always a good time with you guys. So great. So what would you like to talk about first?
Yeah, great. So I think it would be most relevant to define what are we talking about. So there's an upcoming seminar called Stages of Life, but I think the millennial generation maybe coined the term adulting, so the stages of life I know about is like maybe I'm a kid, maybe I'm an adult, and then maybe I'm elderly, but what are we talking about with the stages of life? What is the model that is the stages of life that went into what is now a 10-session seminar?
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I think it might be good to talk about how kind of where it came from, or there was some insights along the way that gave me looking at things a certain way where that showed up. The stages showed up. So it was like, you live long enough, and if you're reflecting on what's happening, you can kind of see patterns, and you see the patterns in not just your own life, but in the lives of other people. So for instance, people talk about the midlife crisis, right? Seems like a lot of people in their 40s or early 50s, whenever that midlife time, go through some sort of major transformation in their life. It seems
I think the quote
true.
is 3 or 4 crises in your life now. It's not just midlife. You have to have
right.
20.
There's the half-life crisis. There's the quarter-life crisis. There's the right. There's the crisis of puberty. There's the right. So if you look back and you can start to see some things, and then there's been a lot of work done over the last 100 years or so on human development. So Piaget and Lovegren and Aurobindo. Ken Wilber's work, the work of Claire Graves and spiral dynamics. These are all different conversations talking about how human beings develop. Keegan, another one. Everybody's been working on this problem. Like, there seems to be some way that people develop and grow over their life. And you just don't stop when you're 18 or 23 or whatever it is. You keep growing if you do. And some people don't. So what causes that, right? So there's this whole kind of gray area they did a lot of research on over that time. And if you start mating up the various kind of discoveries or insights that these researchers and authors have created or discovered, you see that there are patterns inside the patterns, that they're actually overlays that work. And then I have a background in spiritual practice and spiritual teaching. I've been meditating for 56 years, I think, something like a long time, and have studied various disciplines along the way. And I studied astrology when I was very young. I was a yogi. I did all the new agey stuff when I was in my 20s, pretty much. And those patterns also map onto the ones I just talked about. Like there is something that is universally so about how human beings develop. And you can look at it all these different angles from different disciplines, and they're all talking about the same thing, right? Kind of like one mountain, everybody's looking at it from different angles, Right. So
in fact, sorry to interrupt you, your business partner, Scott Forgy, who co-created this with you, also has a very diverse background. He's been a lawyer. He's owned a publicly traded company. He's led to, hundreds of thousands of people.
Black belt in karate, practiced Zen Buddhism, Hinduism.
Seems to me you guys are working on trying to fit 2 lifetimes into one.
I feel like it's more like 10 lifetimes into one.
Well, you know what?
So all of that must have played a part in what has culminated in this work that you've put together called Stages of Life. But it's not just your own lives, right? You're referencing all these great minds who've been on this project of trying to understand or define or be able to talk about how do human beings develop.
Yeah, well, Scott has a PhD in philosophy, right? So
that would help.
So it's like there's, that's like 3,000 years of work on how do human beings' lives work and how do you live a great life and, what's the reality versus fantasy and all of it, right? So that plus transformational work plus, it's crazy. There's a lot. So you can, if you're curious and you're diligent and you're paying attention, there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to experience, right? But it's about generating that, well, why does it work that way? That's what drove me. It was like, I could tell you my life story full of drama and, crises and blow-ups and everything. But at the, in the quiet moments, you ask, well, why does it work that way? So really all this that we're going to talk about today came from a lifetime of study and reflection personally, but also universally, like across religions, philosophies, science, all of it, right? So I think there's a framework that starts to show up. It turns out that about every 7 years or so, all the material in your body changes out. It's like all the atoms that make up your bones and your skin and your organs, etc. All those get replaced about every 7 years. So in a physical way, you're actually kind of a new person every 7 years-ish. And then if you look at life, things seem to move in a 7-year cycle, plus or minus a couple of years. It's depending on the person and the life circumstances, right? So a person is born, age 0, right? 7 years later, they're now capable of rational thought, and they have a well-developed ego structure, and there's a clear eye, there's language, right? So we just described infancy to childhood. And then about another 7 years or so, plus or minus a few years, depending on life circumstances, people go through this shift from childhood to adolescence, right? Mm. And not just physically, but psychologically and cognitively. But it's a big deal. It's a big, hairy change, right? And then there's this move from adolescence to beginning adulthood, what we'll call adult 1.0, which is actually an adolescent's view of what adulthood looks like. So it's still adolescence, an extended adolescence. That would happen at around 21. So most people that went to university, for instance, would graduate college around then, and then they would live this life from 21 to 28-ish or so, basically living what they perceive an adult life would look like.
I think that was one of the most powerful things, that how you guys have broken up adulthood into multiple stages. You just got done talking about what you're calling adult 1.0. That was really quite new I was a little bit joking about the term adulting, but there's more to develop, or there's another phase, or what am I meant to be doing in this phase versus this phase, or what's an authentic expression of what my life looks like in these different stages, and how do I figure that out?
Yeah, I think there's a real interest because there's an anxiety. If you actually pay attention to what's happening to yourself, for most people, there's an anxiety about the future. And there's a question about the present, like, am I where I should be? Am I as far along as I should be? I look around and I compare myself to other people, and let's say I come up short. It's like, I must be missing something because that idiot over there is doing way better than me. And, I mean, really, right? I mean, there's all that kind of comparison going on, right? So that plus the kind of existential anxiety that naturally arises when you are looking into the future. How is that going to turn out, right? And, we're animals that are aware of our own mortality. So there's that existential threat, right, which is ignored until at some point in your life you can't ignore it anymore. And then it's like, oh, there's only so much quality time remaining. What am I going to do with that? And how's that going to turn out, right? So there's kind of underneath the normal experience is this anxiety. And there's never been a model really, except for there are religious models, there are some philosophical models. And the psychologists I mentioned earlier, they were working on how do we understand how humans develop and progress, and can we assist that, or can we remove the barriers to growth and development, right? So for people in education, for people who are adult educators like myself and others, it's a big topic, right?
See, what I got from being exposed to this idea was that I saw that in an earlier stage of my life, one of the things I was meant to do was developing really strong teamwork, kind of playing as a team, being on a team, being, that kind of peer-to-peer relationship of, maybe would have been with siblings, but I was an only child, and maybe would have been with friends, but I had a kind of a close-knit group, and so I didn't really develop that. And here I am living my life, I'm professional and doing really great work, but there's still areas where I don't have that muscle, or that achievement is not unlocked for me in that particular domain.
That's why we call it the attainments, right? Every stage has attainments, which that's like the work there is to do during that period. And when you're fulfilled with all that, then you naturally move on to the next stage of development. But sometimes because of life conditions, or because of our own lack of a development from an earlier stage, we don't get those attainments. And now here you are, an adult, the age you are, with stuff that you need to work on, right? Like, oh, I don't have the skill of socializing with people I don't particularly care about. That's actually a skill that's important if you're an adult, right?
Yeah. It limits what's possible in the things I'm really interested in doing and in providing. It makes it, and the same kinds of problems keep happening, and I couldn't figure out why that was. And then I was like, oh, that's why that's happening. And then now I can go to work on that.
Yeah, exactly. So do you think it would be interesting to look at the model itself?
Absolutely. That'd be great.
Yeah. So let me get that up on the screen. So I'll say a little something about this. This is a kind of a model of models. It is an abstraction that is a synthesis of Abraham Maslow's work, the work of Claire Graves in spiral dynamics, insights that I had, and work that is related to all that, psychology and ontological work, etc. So if you look along the bottom of the slide there, you'll see numbers, and those are years old, ages. So 7, 14, 21 in 7-year increments, okay? The color bar above that time scale are the colors of spiral dynamics, to give a sense of if a person was developing freely and life conditions didn't inhibit their development, those particular V-memes, value memes, or points of view would naturally arise in that person's consciousness and be expressing through that person, right? As they naturally grew up and developed. What happens to most folks is that they get stuck in circumstances where they can't develop past a certain point, or life conditions inhibit them in some other way, or they miss attainments earlier and have to go backwards and work on those things so that they can continue to develop. But that's that scale. We'll get into that in a little bit. But so the first is infancy. We talked about that, and who you are for yourself when you're an infant is you just exist. Everything is viewed through the lens of it's all me. You know, if I get angry at mommy and then mommy faints, I caused that to happen by being angry with her, right? Because I am the source of everything when you're that age, right? So around 7 plus or minus 2, right? 5 years through maybe even 8 years old or 9 years old, people become their family. Like if you ask an 8 or 9 year old, are you a Democrat or a Republican? They will usually say what their family is, right? Are you a Catholic, or what are you? What religion are you? And you would usually say because you identify strongly with the family you belong to, right? And then when you're 14, it's I am not my family. I am, in fact, I am. I don't want anything to do with those people at some point. And so rather than being identified with the nuclear family group, you become identified with your peers, all of whom are kind of in the same state. So it's kind of like the blind leading the blind, right? And there are lots of impulsive behavior not well thought through happening at that age. Also, you have the difficulty of all the hormonal influences driving your behavior and driving what you care about. Great. So around 21-ish, in psychological terms, we talk about the early adult transition. This is where your mama and daddy aren't going to come help you necessarily. They're not going to save you. If you do something really dumb, you're not going to get bailed out necessarily. It's like, oh, I got to actually pull this off myself. I got to show up at work on time. I actually have to deliver results that they want me to deliver at work. I have to learn how to go to bed early enough so that I can get up and actually produce what I have to produce. I have to cook my own food, or I have to, right? Like I have to do my own laundry, for goodness sake. It's like all of that stuff. So that's adulting 1.0. And what people do is they're adolescents that are trying to kind of figure out what that looks like, right? How does it feel to live like an adult? Around 28, adult 2.0. This is where you look around and you go, those cement block shelves that I've got for bookshelves and my crappy beanbag chair, it's just not good enough. I think I need to get some adult furniture, right? And other people look around and say, you know what? I need to find a partner to build something with. Let's build a family. That's what I'm doing right now, okay? So you find a lot of people get married around 28, or if they're married, they have a child at 28. You start actually being an adult, having what adults have, like a mortgage or a car payment, or, there's an imperative. There's I'm not trying out being an independent person. I'm now starting to become an interdependent person. I'm going to partner with somebody and we're going to build something together. Or I'm going to start a company and we're going to build something as a team together, right? See what I mean? That doesn't occur at age 23 typically, right? Because what you're about at 23 is you're out having a good time, trying to figure out how to be an independent person, right? So this interdependency thing starts to come in adult 2.0. And then around 35, and this is probably true, you probably remember this very closely, you're examining how far you've gotten, right? It's sort of like, who I am is how I'm perceived by others. And am I driving the right car? Should I buy a new Apple Watch? I mean, it's like, is our house big enough? It starts to become, a very interesting to, I've made it, I'm successful, see? Right? And then once you get through that, you're now about, well, now I can be a member of a community and lead others in the community, right? Mm-hmm. Let's give back. Let's do this thing. Or you double down on the Adult 2.0 agenda, which is, by God, I'm going to be a millionaire. And that's where you just work 60 hours a week and like that. You basically double down. It's kind of like your life bifurcates there. And you choose to have a gracious retirement at age 40, in your view, or you double down and, really work hard. So that's where most people wind up in life. There's this thing that happens next. It's around 42. You know your work. You're good at it. You're a professional now. It's not like you need to be trained anymore. You really are a pro. And you wake up in the morning and it's like, what am I doing with my life? That's what that experience is like. I don't know if you guys have had that experience yet, but
the question I have too is like, this doesn't necessarily always go in a linear fashion for people, right? Like, no. My experience is like, I was focused on more of like a different stage at earlier in my life. And then as I got older, I flipped. For example, I was focused on like leading groups and etc. But I wasn't necessarily focused on, I got to double down. And that stage came later, like recently.
Yes.
It's not necessarily like a linear progression, right? People could jump around in their development.
Right. Yeah, except. So, for instance, I'll give you an example from my life, and then I'll do a for instance that's in popular culture right now. So, when I was in my 20s, when I should have been doing Adult 1.0 things, like going to big music festivals and having loads of lovers and experiences and travel the world and all that stuff, what I was doing is being a monk, because I was a big idealist, and what I wanted to do is find out what the truth was, and that's an Adult 1.0 thing. That's called find the truth, and if you're true to the truth, life will work out, and your relationship with God will be solid, right? So in my Adult 1.0 space, what I was looking for is something that was bigger than me, that I could join with, that would solve the existential terror of not knowing what the future was or what life is about. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I was working on adopting values and ways of being that were appropriate to 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds at age 20. So I completely missed my Adult 1.0 experiences because I was working on being 80 years old.
But Gabe, right? I think you and I spoke about this before. I was on a similar trajectory. Yeah. I was focused, I was like, that was all that mattered to me in my earlier stages of life. So people with like building money and career, and I was just like, why? Why are you guys doing that?
Because Yeah, but you see, consider that you and I were probably doing that from the point of view of the values of someone in Adult 1.0.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
quite different from actually being that.
Absolutely, yeah.
75 years old and you've meditated for 60 years. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like, it's totally a different, right? So in popular culture right now, we have what's called the woke culture, if you will.
Yes.
And that is a system of belief, like the way things should be, that would naturally flower at the age of around 35 to 40, right? But it's adopted by people when they're in grad school or college. So they're blue thinkers adopting what they're taught in philosophy class from really cool professors who are in their 30s and 40s, talking about how the world could be if we just changed our vocabulary, for instance, which is absolutely awesome. It's just that when you adopt it as an adult 1.0 person, you take it on like it's like an ideology, and
Yes.
you're right about it, and you make other people wrong when they don't agree with you. And of course, you fail miserably at getting them involved because they just think you're an argumentative, closed-minded person, instead of someone who actually is gracious with everyone, or includes everyone, for instance, right? So it's possible to, from a more junior, unfolding of consciousness, to adopt something that actually doesn't belong in that and turn it into the rules, for instance, as opposed to a natural way to see things, right? So in this transformation thing, people in their 40s go through just confronting that everything they've done before is not really their life. It's all a compensation for, or delusion based on ideologies that they adopted earlier in their life, right? Or it was trying to get somewhere, please somebody, be superior to others around them, be admired by other people, other superficially not useful things when you're at that level of development. Because you realize your life is going to end at that point. And it's like, is this all it is? Is this all it is, right? So then what can dawn, if you go through the transformation consciously, is you can get that you're actually the source of all meaning in your life. Like it's your life. And you can call it like you see it. And if you look, you can see patterns and everything. And notice that in that yellow space, notice that it's pretty much all information. Some of it's more useful than others. Different discourses have different effects and different benefits and costs, right? So you can choose at that point. And that would be authentic self, which is what everybody really wants. To actually be yourself in life, at work, at home, and to express yourself naturally and include all the other people and be gracious and generous with everyone, no matter what their stage of development is, right? So that would be the dawning of what in the spiral dynamics conversation is called the second tier. The first tier is the green adult 3.0 consciousness all the way down to infancy. And that's where most people develop to in life. And a few people are lucky, and they can actually kind of grow up past that, usually through some dark night of the soul kind of experience. Some kind of where your whole identity falls apart, and you have to invent yourself as an authentic self.
So Gabe, for people
like what's really there,
like you said, for most people, they'll most likely find themselves in what you've been talking about in adult 1, 2, or 3.0 stages. But if I'm right about this, there is something that prompts moving forward or evolving to the next stage. Can you talk about what do I need to do, or what's my project if I notice that I'm in the range of one of the other stages, like maybe I'm 35 to 42 or something like that, but I find I'm turning everything into the truth. I notice I'm resonating too much with the adult 1.0, and it might be time for me to move up to these more sophisticated levels. What is it that prompts that? Or how do I get to work on moving myself up the food chain here?
Right. Well, it's you got to be careful, because people will turn this into like steps of a ladder, and it doesn't actually work that way.
Yeah.
It's as you grow and mature, you include the earlier stage or stages, and you just get expanded. It's like when you go from childhood to adolescence, you still have all the capacities of childhood. You have all the abilities, you have the perspectives, you have beautiful memories or hard memories, depending, right? You have the magic of childhood, all that stuff's still in there when you're an adolescent, except that there's something added to it. Now it's social. Now it's sexual. Now it's, I have more freedom. I can move around. I can drive. I can, whatever. You see what I mean? It's like there's more. It's like childhood plus, right? Plus all the layers that get added when you become an adolescent, and the same thing for each layer. So, for instance, if someone happens to be very embedded in adult 1.0 consciousness, they'll probably bump into things that don't work. Like they keep trying to make something happen in life. Like, why can't I get ahead? I'm working really hard. I'm obeying all the rules, and I keep getting stuck with a $36,000 job and no appreciation.
That was certainly my experience.
Right. So at that point, it starts to dawn on you. Well, maybe
That was my experience too.
Right? Maybe the way I'm behaving and thinking isn't giving me the advantages that other people around me, my competitors, are having. And so you start developing this kind of this orange V-meme way of looking at things, like being skillful, being politically savvy, developing a network, getting an MBA, doing things that will make you more marketable in the marketplace, right? If that happens to be your project, right? There are many other manifestations of that skillful means, like developing skillful means and building myself, my brand, my abilities. That's all what happens in adult 2.0. So there's a kind of a natural push to that if you are stuck in adult 1.0 and are unsatisfied, right? So now that said, if you're in a community where everyone around you is a rule-based thinker and everyone is working on being good and following the rules and being, a good compliant member of the community, then you're all thinking in the same way and you're all reinforcing each other's values. So there's not a lot of push to change, right? This is why they say, international travel is really good for you, because you bump into people that you've never even run into a human being like that. And you like what they have. So it's like, well, how could they even think that way? Right? And that tends to stimulate this need to grow and develop, right? So anyway, just let's talk a little bit more, but these are more advanced stages. Okay? This is what's possible as a human being, to become cosmically conscious. But we won't talk about that here, but it's the same thing. The earlier stage becomes somehow insufficient. It's like, I've mastered this. There's something else. It's kind of like being on the floor of Yosemite, looking up at El Capitan, and then you see a certain beautiful view. And then as you start to climb the face, the view gets better and better, right? As you get higher and higher until you're on the top, and you're looking around, it's like you can see the universe. Well, it's the same thing with spiral dynamics. So that's part of what informs the model that we're calling the stages of life. Another model is Maslow's hierarchy. This is the great Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist, who talked about what motivates people to grow and develop. And the deficiency needs there below the bottom part of the pyramid. Most of the world are operating in that things, and that's in those stages. Like they're working on esteem, people need to be admired and need to admire others. They need to be loved and admired and to give those things. And once those are in place, along with safety and your physiological needs, food and shelter, etc., then what naturally comes up is, well, I want to develop myself. Right? I want to become more, I want to get educated. I want to become a wider person. And then comes the aesthetic. Now that I'm getting sophisticated, well, let's talk about art. Let's talk about wine. Let's talk about, right? Let's talk about interior design. Which then goes finally to transcendence, which is then it's not about me anymore. It's about, what can I give to the world? What's my legacy? What can I provide from my level of mastery that makes a difference for others? So when you ask what has someone move from one stage to another, it has to do with these needs that the next level up is kind of calling, right? And that's what drives people. So what we want to do is to have every adult on the planet be working on self-actualization and transcendence by the time they're 50.
Yeah, that
If we
would.
actually could change the culture, right? Change the culture enough so that people, it's not about me anymore. It's about what I can provide to my community, right? You get people in that world, suddenly the world works for everybody. And that's our big
Yeah,
goal at UM.
that's something definitely that speaks to me as well, and Heejin, I know you as well, of
Yeah.
like the project to be on, and I think one of it you mentioned about the globalization, the impact of seeing, when I grew up in the United States in California, I didn't really get exposed to what's really going on. And I think, regardless of where you grow up, it tends to be you kind of get in a little bit of a bubble, and then as you get exposed, you're like, wow, it's really intense what's really going on with the rest of the world. But then what do I do about that? But I'm also not really equipped to start working on that because there's still things I haven't really dealt with myself. And
Yeah,
it's a great
right,
model that we're just
right.
looking at because it's very compassionate. Like if I can deal with, we want to provide, for those people who don't have physiological safety, we want to provide.
Right.
But we also want to provide that if you have like give you the opportunity to move beyond just trying to get your ego esteem needs met as well. They're also sort of stuck in an unfulfilled life as well. Not as maybe physically dangerous,
Yeah,
but
it's just different layers. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Heejin, you were gonna.
Well, I was just saying, so then who should do this seminar? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of like basic training. I mean, if you think
yeah,
about it, anybody that's an adult, like adult
yeah,
1.0, or, of course, younger people could do it. Imagine if you had this when you were a teenager
it would be
or
so
even a
helpful.
child. Like, okay, here, honey, here's how human life is like. This is the whole life. And you're right here at the very beginning and see all this cool stuff that's going to come. I mean, wouldn't that have been great?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it would have saved me so much grief and anxiety, right? But so I think anybody could do it, but we're going to be training adults. We're going to be doing it at the adult
Yeah,
level. So
yeah,
I would say anybody that's got a question about, am I doing the right thing? Am I really fulfilling my life? If there's any anxiety about, if I die now, will I be okay with dying? Am I okay with, like, if I get hit by a bus and I'm, I got 30 minutes to live, what am I going to say to myself? I mean, really, I've had those thoughts like back when I was, in my 30s. It was like, what am I doing with myself? Right? So I think it's anybody that's thoughtful like that would totally love
would be,
this. And I
yeah,
think anybody that is working on being successful
yeah,
and wondering why they're like hitting the glass
yes,
ceiling, right? It's because there are attainments that didn't get made earlier in your development when you see them, you go, oh, of course. Now I can do something about it, right? And that then breaks the glass ceiling. Of so many people that were in your course were just having
yes.
totally different lives out of it because they
Totally
got
different lives,
conscious too.
including myself. Once I got exactly what attainments I needed to get, there was just no confusion about it. It's just like, okay, let's do it. And then things move so quickly.
Yeah, like crazy
Where
quickly.
like I got a new job, I got a new car, I got a new place, and then I started focusing on attaining skills within like developing myself in a particular way at work.
Yeah,
And it just wouldn't have happened had I not done the seminar.
yeah,
It wouldn't have happened that intentionally.
yeah. It's really
so
cool to hear. it's a
I
real
want to give
satisfying
people a
thing.
little bit of a
Yeah.
clue to how to do that. So the next seminar, which you gave, will be co-leading with Scott, correct?
Yes.
That's happening on September 26th. The first one starts on September 26th, and the link to find out more information will be in the show notes of this video.
I just said we want to invite everybody to come. It's going to be a blast. It was last time, and I'm sure it will be this
So
time
yeah,
too.
Gabe, I want to thank you very much, and Heejin for co-leading with me,
Thank
and thank
you.
you for being here. It was a really awesome conversation, and look forward to more like it.
So do
All
I.
right,
Thank you.
thanks everyone.